Mr. Thompson, you're here for speeding in a school zone, the judge said dismissively. What she didn't know was that Frank had been rushing to stop something terrible. When the truth came out, the entire courtroom stood in stunned silence. Because Frank Thompson wasn't just any 76-year-old man with a traffic ticket. He was the retired FBI agent who had been tracking a potential school shooter for 3 weeks. And that speeding violation, it was the moment he saved 300 children's lives. But the judge was about to learn something even more shocking about why Frank was really in that courtroom. The Hamilton County Municipal Courthouse buzzed with the familiar chaos of a Tuesday morning traffic docket. Judge Rebecca Martinez sat behind her elevated bench, her black robes a stark contrast against the warm oak paneling that had witnessed decades of minor legal infractions. The American flag hung limply in the corner, and the scales of justice emblem on the wall seemed to mock the assembly line nature of what passed for jurisprudence in traffic court. Case number 2024 TC 4782 called out the court clerk, a middle-aged woman whose voice had long since lost any inflection after years of reading case numbers. City of Hamilton versus Franklin J. Thompson. Speeding in a school zone. Frank Thompson rose slowly from the back row of the gallery, his worn brown leather jacket creaking softly as he stood. At 76, he moved with the deliberate care of someone whose body reminded him daily of his advancing years. His silver hair was neatly combed, his face clean-shaven, and his pale blue eyes held the alertness of someone who had spent a lifetime paying attention to details others missed. Judge Martinez glanced up from her computer screen with a weary expression of someone who had seen this scene play out hundreds of times before. Another elderly driver caught going too fast near a school, probably confused about speed limits, definitely about to waste everyone's time with explanations about doctor's appointments or prescription medications affecting their judgment. Mr. Thompson, she said, consulting her notes without really looking at him. You're charged with exceeding the posted speed limit by 15 miles per hour in a designated school zone on Maple Street. How do you plead? Frank approached the defendant's table, his footsteps echoing in a half-empty courtroom. A few other traffic violators sat scattered in the gallery, scrolling through their phones while waiting for their own cases to be called. The prosecutor, a young man named David Chen who looked like he graduated law school approximately 5 minutes ago, was organizing his files with the efficient boredom of someone handling his 40th traffic case of the morning. Your Honor, Frank said, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to speaking with precision. I'd like to plead not guilty and request a trial. Judge Martinez's pen stopped moving. She looked up for the first time, taking in Frank's appearance with undisguised annoyance. Traffic court was supposed to be quick. Guilty plea, fine, next case. People who requested trials were just prolonging the inevitable while wasting taxpayer money. Mr. Thompson, I should inform you that this violation carries a mandatory fine of $300 plus court costs. If you proceed to trial and are found guilty, that amount could increase significantly. I understand, Your Honor. And you still wish to proceed? Yes, Your Honor. Judge Martinez sighed and made a note on her calendar. Very well. Prosecutor Chen, are you prepared to proceed? David Chen looked up from his files, clearly having expected this to be a 5-minute guilty plea. Yes, Your Honor. The state is ready. Then let's get this over with. Judge Martinez's tone suggested that she considered this entire proceeding a waste of time. Mr. Chen, call your first witness. The state calls Officer Michael Rodriguez. Officer Rodriguez was exactly what Frank had expected, young, earnest, probably still believing that every ticket he wrote was making the world a safer place. He took the stand with a confident bearing of someone who had testified in traffic court dozens of times and never lost a case. Officer Rodriguez, Chen began, please tell the court about your observations on October 15th at approximately 2:47 p.m. on Maple Street. Yes, sir. I was conducting routine speed enforcement in the 15-mile-per-hour school zone when I observed the defendant's vehicle, a 2018 Honda Civic, traveling at what appeared to be an excessive rate of speed. And what did your radar gun indicate? 30 miles per hour in a 15-mile-per-hour zone. Judge Martinez was already reaching for her gavel. This was exactly the kind of straightforward case she could dispose of quickly. Speeding ticket, clear radar reading, guilty verdict, next case. Thank you, Officer Rodriguez, Chen said. No further questions. Judge Martinez looked at Frank with barely concealed impatience. Mr. Thompson, do you have any questions for the officer? Frank stood slowly, studying Officer Rodriguez with a kind of attention that made the young cop suddenly uncomfortable. There was something in the old man's eyes that suggested he wasn't just another confused senior citizen trying to talk his way out of a ticket. Officer Rodriguez, Frank began, in your report, you noted that this incident occurred at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. That's correct. And you were positioned where, exactly? About 50 yards north of Lincoln Elementary School, near the intersection of Maple and 3rd Street. So you had a clear view of the school? Yes, sir. Frank paused, seeming to consider his next question carefully. Officer, during the time you were conducting this speed enforcement, did you observe anything else unusual in the area? Rodriguez frowned. Unusual how? Any individuals who seemed out of place? Any vehicles that caught your attention besides mine? No, sir. I was focused on speed enforcement. I see. Frank walked closer to the witness stand. Officer Rodriguez, what's the protocol when you observe a vehicle exceeding the speed limit by 15 miles per hour? Standard procedure is to pursue and initiate a traffic stop. And did you pursue my vehicle? Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. Well, no, sir. By the time I had a clear radar reading, your vehicle had already stopped. Stopped where? In the school parking lot. Judge Martinez was beginning to pay closer attention now. This wasn't the typical traffic case cross-examination. Officer Rodriguez, Frank continued, when you approached my vehicle in the school parking lot, what did you observe? You were getting out of your car and walking toward the school building. And what was my demeanor? You seemed urgent, like you were in a hurry. Did I attempt to flee when you approached? No, sir. You actually seemed relieved to see me. Frank nodded. Thank you, Officer Rodriguez. No further questions. As Rodriguez returned to his seat, Judge Martinez found herself genuinely curious for the first time all morning. Frank Thompson's cross-examination had been too precise, too focused for a typical traffic defendant. There was something else going on here. Mr. Thompson, she said, do you intend to testify on your own behalf? Yes, Your Honor. Frank took the witness stand with the steady composure of someone who had testified in courtrooms before, though Judge Martinez couldn't shake the feeling that those courtrooms had probably been handling more serious matters than traffic violations. Mr. Thompson, Frank began, representing himself. Please tell the court why you were driving 30 miles per hour in a 15-mile-per-hour school zone on October 15. Frank looked directly at Judge Martinez, his pale blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her sit up straighter. Your Honor, I was responding to a credible threat against Lincoln Elementary School. The courtroom went completely silent. Even the court reporter's fingers stopped moving on her stenotype machine. A threat? Judge Martinez repeated. Yes, Your Honor. I had been tracking an individual for approximately 3 weeks who had made specific, credible threats against that school. On October 15th, at 2:43 p.m., I received information that this individual was en route to the school with the intention of carrying out an attack. Prosecutor Chin was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Thompson isn't qualified to testify about law enforcement matters. Frank reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a leather wallet, which he opened to display a badge and identification card. Your Honor, I'm a retired special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I served for 38 years, with the last 15 years focused on domestic terrorism and threat assessment. Judge Martinez stared at the badge, then at Frank, then back at the badge. Mr. Thompson. Agent Thompson, why didn't you contact local law enforcement? I did, Your Honor. I had been working with local authorities for 3 weeks. The Hamilton Police Department was aware of the threat, had increased patrols around the school. However, when I received the immediate threat information that afternoon, there wasn't time to coordinate a proper response. So you took it upon yourself to respond? Your Honor, the individual in question had obtained a firearm 2 days earlier. His online communications indicated he planned to attack the school during dismissal time when the maximum number of children would be present. Dismissal was scheduled for 3 p.m. I received the credible threat information at 2:43 p.m. Frank's voice remained calm and professional, but Judge Martinez could see the weight of the situation in his eyes. I was 17 minutes away from the school. I had a choice: follow traffic laws and potentially arrive after children have been harmed, or exceed the speed limit and potentially prevent a tragedy. Judge Martinez felt her mouth go dry. What happened when you arrived at the school? I intercepted the individual in the parking lot. He was armed with a semi-automatic handgun and had additional ammunition in his backpack. He had already exited his vehicle, and was walking toward the main entrance when I detained him. Detained him how? I performed a citizen's arrest and held him until Officer Rodriguez and additional units arrived. The individual is currently awaiting trial on federal terrorism charges. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Judge Martinez could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. "Mr. Thompson," she said slowly, "are you telling me that you prevented a school shooting?" "Yes, Your Honor." According to the suspect's communications and preparations, he intended to harm as many children as possible. Lincoln Elementary has 297 students enrolled. Judge Martinez looked down at the citation in front of her, a simple speeding ticket that suddenly seemed monumentally insignificant. "Your Honor," Frank continued, "I understand that I violated the posted speed limit. I also understand that traffic laws exist for public safety. However, I believe that in this specific circumstance, the greater public safety concern justified my actions." Prosecutor Chun looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Judge Martinez realized that every person in the courtroom was staring at her, waiting for her response to what was possibly the most extraordinary circumstances she had ever encountered in traffic court. "Mr. Thompson," she said finally, "do you have documentation of this incident?" Frank reached into his jacket again and withdrew a folder. "Yes, Your Honor. I have the FBI case file, statements from the Hamilton Police Department, and a letter from the principal of Lincoln Elementary School." Judge Martinez accepted the documents with hands that she hoped weren't visibly shaking. As she reviewed the paperwork, the full scope of what had occurred became clear. Frank Thompson hadn't just prevented a school shooting. He had done so while working entirely outside official channels, using skills and experience gained over nearly 4 decades of federal law enforcement. The FBI case file detailed a 3-week investigation into an individual who had made increasingly specific threats against Lincoln Elementary. The Hamilton Police Department statement confirmed that Frank had been serving as an unofficial consultant on the case, providing behavioral analysis and threat assessment expertise. The letter from the school principal was perhaps the most powerful document, a simple thank you note expressing the gratitude of an entire school community for Frank's actions. Judge Martinez set down the documents and looked at Frank, who sat patiently waiting for her decision. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "in 35 years on the bench, I have never encountered circumstances like these." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The law is clear that exceeding the speed limit in a school zone is a violation, regardless of the circumstances. However, the law also recognizes that there are situations where strict adherence to one regulation might prevent compliance with a higher moral or legal obligation." She looked around the courtroom, noting that several people had quietly entered and were standing along the walls, listening to the proceedings. "Mr. Thompson, based on the evidence presented and the extraordinary circumstances of this case, I find you not guilty of the charge violation." The courtroom erupted in applause. Frank simply nodded once, as if he had expected nothing less. Furthermore, Judge Martinez continued, raising her voice to be heard over the applause, "I want to commend you for your service to this community and to our country. Your actions on October 15th exemplify the highest traditions of law enforcement and public service." As the applause died down, Judge Martinez made a decision that surprised even herself. "Mr. Thompson, would you be willing to remain after court today? I'd like to discuss the possibility of your serving as a consultant to our court system on matters involving threat assessment and public safety." Frank smiled for the first time since entering the courtroom. "I'd be honored, Your Honor." 3 hours later, Frank Thompson sat in Judge Martinez's chambers, a cup of coffee growing cold on the table beside him. The judge had removed her robes, revealing a professional suit that made her seem more approachable, more human than the stern figure who presided over traffic court. "Mr. Thompson," she began, "I have to ask, why didn't you identify yourself as a federal agent when you were cited?" Frank smiled slightly. "Judge Martinez, I've been retired for 2 years. Technically, I have no more authority than any other citizen. I didn't prevent that school shooting because of my badge. I prevented it because I saw a threat and had the skills to respond. But surely Officer Rodriguez would have understood. Officer Rodriguez was doing his job. He saw a traffic violation and issued a citation. The fact that there were extraordinary circumstances doesn't change the fact that I broke the law." Judge Martinez shook her head. "You have an unusual perspective on justice, Mr. Thompson. I have experience with the difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. Sometimes they align perfectly. Sometimes they don't." A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Judge Martinez's secretary entered with a concerned expression. Judge Martinez, there are several reporters outside who are asking about the Thompson case. And the mayor's office called. They want to schedule a meeting. Frank sighed. This is exactly what I was hoping to avoid. What do you mean? Judge Martinez, I didn't prevent that school shooting for recognition or awards. I did it because children were in danger, and I had the ability to help. Now it's going to become a media circus, and the focus will shift from school safety to my personal story. Judge Martinez studied Frank's face, recognizing something she had seen in other veterans and law enforcement officers, a fundamental discomfort with being called a hero for simply doing what they saw as their duty. Mr. Thompson, what if we could use the attention for something positive? What do you have in mind? Hamilton County has been struggling with threat assessment and crisis response in our schools. We have protocols, but they were written by bureaucrats who have never actually dealt with a real threat. What if you could help us develop better systems? Frank leaned back in his chair, considering. Judge Martinez, I'm 76 years old. I'm not looking to start a new career. I'm not talking about a career. I'm talking about using your expertise to potentially save lives. You said yourself that you've been tracking threats for weeks before this incident. How many other potential threats are out there that we're missing? The question hung in the air between them. Frank knew the answer, and Judge Martinez could see it in his expression. More than you want to know, Frank said quietly. Then help us get better at finding them. Frank stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the courthouse parking lot where a small group of reporters was beginning to gather. Judge Martinez, if I agree to help, I have conditions. Name them. First, no publicity. No press conferences. No award ceremonies. No recognition. I work behind the scenes, and my involvement stays confidential. Agreed. Second, I report directly to you. No bureaucratic committees. No political oversight. If I identify a threat, I need to be able to act on it immediately. That might be difficult to arrange, but I'll make it work. Third, this isn't a paid position. I volunteer my time, and I retain the right to walk away at any point if I feel the system is being compromised by politics or bureaucracy. Judge Martinez smiled. Mr. Thompson, you really don't want any recognition for this, do you? Judge Martinez, I've spent my entire adult life in service to others. First in the military, then with the FBI. Recognition isn't why I do this work. Then why do you do it? Frank turned back from the window, and Judge Martinez saw something in his eyes that made her understand why he had been so effective as a federal agent. Because someone has to. And because I'm good at it. The Hamilton County Courthouse had added a new position to its organizational chart, Special Consultant for Threat Assessment and Public Safety. The position appeared nowhere in the public budget, was funded through a discretionary account that Judge Martinez controlled, and was occupied by someone whose name never appeared in any official documentation. Frank Thompson arrived at the courthouse every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 7 a.m., 2 hours before traffic court began. He worked in a small office on the third floor that had no nameplate on the door and no listing in the building directory. Most courthouse employees knew him only as the consultant who helps with security issues. In 6 months, Frank had identified and helped neutralize 4 potential threats against local schools. He had also developed new protocols for threat assessment that had been quietly adopted by school districts throughout the county. His work had prevented 3 stalking situations from escalating to violence, and his analysis had helped local law enforcement identify 2 individuals planning domestic terrorism attacks. None of this had appeared in any newspaper. Frank's name had never been mentioned in any public meeting. The only recognition he received was the occasional handwritten thank you note from a principal or teacher whose school had been made safer by his work. On this particular Thursday morning, Frank was reviewing social media posts that had been flagged by the monitoring system he had helped develop when his phone rang. Frank Thompson. Mr. Thompson, this is Judge Martinez. Could you come to my chambers? There's someone here I'd like you to meet. Frank found Judge Martinez sitting across from a woman in a dark suit who looked like federal law enforcement. Mr. Thompson, Judge Martinez said, this is Special Agent Sarah Chin from the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Task Force. Agent Chin stood and extended her hand. Mr. Thompson, I've been reviewing your work here in Hamilton County. I have a proposition for you. Frank shook her hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact that marked her as someone serious about her work. Agent Chin, I'm retired. I understand that, sir. But the Bureau has been developing a new program, a network of retired agents and analysts who can provide expertise to local communities on threat assessment and prevention. What you've accomplished here is exactly the kind of model we want to replicate nationally. Frank looked at Judge Martinez, who was smiling slightly. Agent Chin, Frank said, I'm not interested in coming out of retirement. I'm not asking you to, sir. I'm asking if you'd be willing to train others to do what you're doing here. We have dozens of communities that could benefit from this kind of program, and we have hundreds of retired agents who have the skills but not the framework. Frank walked to the window, looking down at the courthouse parking lot where ordinary people were going about their daily business, unaware of the threats that existed around them or the people working quietly to keep them safe. Agent Chin, he said finally, what exactly are you proposing? A training program. 2 weeks, 4 times a year. You teach experienced agents and analysts how to develop community-based threat assessment programs. We provide the resources and the support structure. And the recognition? Agent Chin smiled. Mr. Thompson, your reputation in the Bureau is legendary. Everyone knows about your work on domestic terrorism cases, your threat assessment expertise, and your ability to prevent violence before it occurs. But if you're asking about public recognition for this program, there won't be any. Just like your work here, it would be behind the scenes. Frank turned back to face the 2 women. Judge Martinez, what do you think? I think, Judge Martinez said, that you have an opportunity to save a lot of lives. And I think that's something you won't be able to walk away from. Frank smiled. Agent Chin, when would this program start? Whenever you're ready, sir. Frank Thompson, 76-year-old retired FBI agent, guardian of school children, and the man who had turned a simple traffic ticket into a revolution in community safety, nodded once. Let's get started. Because sometimes the most important work happens in small offices with no nameplates, done by people who never seek recognition, protecting communities that never know how close they came to tragedy. And sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about prevention. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way. Often in the quietest places, not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to True Story Zone, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.